Officer Daniel Ker Stetter was more than a badge, he was a protector, a symbol of safety, and a man the town trusted with their lives. But when his final call led him to an abandoned warehouse, he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of secrets, betrayal, and a murder that would expose corruption no one expected. Officer Daniel Ker Stetter was the kind of man people trusted instantly. In a small town where everyone knew each other's names, he stood out as someone who didn't just wear the badge but carried the weight of responsibility with quiet pride. His neighbors described him as calm and approachable, yet unshakable when it came to duty. For years, he walked the line between ordinary community service and confronting the darker corners of human behavior that most people tried to ignore. His record was spotless, his dedication unquestionable, and many parents would tell their children that if they ever felt scared, Officer Daniel was the one to look for. On the evening of August 12th, however, everything changed. A call came into dispatch about strange activity around the Milford warehouse, a massive abandoned building that had been an eyesore for years. Rumors of illegal deals and late-night gatherings had followed the place for decades, but most officers dismissed it as gossip. Daniel did not. He followed every lead, no matter how small, and his instinct told him this one deserved attention. He drove alone toward the warehouse as the last glow of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. His cruiser rolled slowly down the cracked asphalt, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The warehouse loomed like a forgotten relic, its broken windows reflecting dimly in the night. At 9:42 p.m., Daniel reported his arrival over the radio. It was the last message anyone would ever hear from him. When his patrol car was found later, it was parked haphazardly near the side of the building, engine running, lights still on. Inside, his radio lay broken on the passenger seat, as if someone had smashed it with force. His service weapon was missing, and there was no sign of Daniel. Searchlights swept across fields and wooded areas nearby. But the officer who once symbolized safety had vanished without explanation. For the first time in years, the town felt vulnerable, as if something dark and calculated had slipped past the thin line of protection Daniel had always provided. The quiet streets no longer felt safe, and the man everyone trusted to guard them was now the one who needed to be found. The disappearance of Officer Daniel Ker Stetter shook the entire community. In the first 48 hours, search parties spread across the town and its outskirts, combing through fields, wooded trails, and riverbanks with the hope of finding any clue. Volunteers walked alongside trained officers, their flashlights sweeping the darkness, their voices calling out his name. Every passing hour without answers made the silence more unbearable. Rumors began to grow. Some claimed Daniel had uncovered something dangerous, while others feared he had been ambushed by strangers passing through. The police department faced mounting pressure to provide answers, but the lack of evidence made every explanation feel incomplete. It wasn't until the third day that a chilling discovery shifted the investigation. A young boy riding his bike along a dirt path spotted something metallic glinting in the sun. It was Daniel's badge, lying in a shallow ditch behind the Milford warehouse. The badge was smeared with dried blood, and its placement seemed deliberate, almost as if someone wanted it to be found. Investigators swarmed the area and carefully examined the ground. Broken glass and faint scuff marks near the warehouse doors suggested there had been a violent struggle, but the scene offered no clear leads. There were no fingerprints, no shoe impressions, and no usable DNA. Whoever had taken Daniel had been careful, almost methodical. The discovery only deepened the town's unease. Families locked their doors earlier than usual, and whispers spread through coffee shops and grocery stores. Some insisted that outsiders had targeted him, while others began to suspect something more sinister, that someone from within the community knew more than they were admitting. The idea that a trusted figure could be behind such an act unsettled everyone. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they noticed strange gaps. Security cameras in nearby streets had been disabled hours before Daniel's arrival at the warehouse. Dispatch logs showed no unusual calls that night besides the one Daniel responded to, and efforts to trace that call led to a dead end. The number was untraceable, furthering suspicions that the entire incident had been a trap. The thought that Daniel had been lured to the warehouse sent a wave of fear through the police department. If someone could carefully orchestrate such a plan against an officer, what else were they capable of? For the first time, the town realized this wasn't just about a missing man, it was about an enemy hiding in plain sight. After nearly 3 weeks of searching, The case took a grim turn when a hunter stumbled upon a body deep in the woods, 10 miles outside of town. The remains were quickly identified as Officer Daniel Ker Stetter. The news spread like wildfire, striking the town with a mixture of grief and dread. For many, the hope of finding him alive had been fading, but the confirmation still felt like a blow no one was prepared for. His body showed clear signs of violence. The coroner's report revealed he had been beaten, restrained, and ultimately strangled. Every mark told the story of a man who fought hard in his final moments. Investigators returned to the evidence with renewed urgency. They traced his last known path and compared it against the brutal injuries. The discovery painted a disturbing picture. Daniel had likely uncovered something bigger than anyone initially imagined. Attention turned back to the Milford warehouse, and it was there that fragments of new evidence began to surface. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, officers found scraps of packaging materials linked to illegal weapons. Further digging suggested the building had been used as a hub for smuggling operations, moving guns and stolen goods through the region under the cover of night. The possibility that Daniel had walked in on such an operation added weight to the theory that he had been silenced for what he discovered. The town's collective sorrow was now mixed with anger and suspicion. How could something so dangerous have been operating right under everyone's noses? The case grew darker when investigators traced financial records connected to the warehouse. The paper trail pointed not to outsiders, but to someone deeply rooted in the community, a prominent businessman known for funding local events and working closely with officials. The idea that a respected figure could be connected to smuggling and possibly to Daniel's death unsettled everyone. Trust in local leadership began to erode, and whispers of corruption grew louder. Yet even as suspicions circled the businessman, the evidence remained frustratingly thin. No direct proof tied him to the murder. The possibility that Daniel had been betrayed by someone powerful enough to cover their tracks left investigators in a dangerous position. They were uncovering pieces of a puzzle that seemed deliberately scrambled. The tragedy of Daniel's death was no longer just about one man. It was becoming a battle between truth and forces determined to keep secrets buried. As the investigation tightened around the businessman, confidence grew that justice might finally be within reach. The town watched closely, expecting a dramatic arrest that would bring closure. But just as prosecutors prepared their case, new evidence emerged that shattered the theory. Surveillance footage from a nearby toll booth placed the businessman hours away on the night Daniel disappeared. Witnesses confirmed his alibi, leaving investigators scrambling. What had seemed like a clear lead now looked like a carefully laid distraction. The focus of the investigation abruptly shifted inward, toward those within the department itself. Internal documents, discovered in Daniel's home office, added fuel to this suspicion. Hidden in a locked drawer was a folder containing handwritten notes, photocopies of case files, and a list of names. The notes suggested Daniel had been quietly investigating corruption within his own department. He appeared to have been building a case against officers he believed were covering up smuggling operations tied to the warehouse. The revelation was explosive. If Daniel had indeed uncovered betrayal among his own colleagues, then the people he trusted most may have orchestrated his death to silence him. The possibility of internal corruption struck fear into the community. For decades, the town had relied on its police force as a source of stability. To imagine that the badge itself might be tainted was devastating. Families began questioning whether they could trust the very officers sworn to protect them. Anonymous tips poured in, some accusing high-ranking officials, others pointing fingers at junior officers known to frequent the warehouse district. Every new lead created more division within the department, as suspicion spread like wildfire. Behind closed doors, investigators wrestled with an uncomfortable truth. Pursuing this line of inquiry meant turning against their own careers, reputations, and even personal safety were at stake. Yet ignoring the evidence would mean betraying Daniel's memory. Pressure from the public grew, and every press conference became more hostile. Reporters demanded answers, families demanded accountability, and the silence from law enforcement only deepened the sense of betrayal. What had started as a tragic killing was now unraveling into something much larger, a conspiracy rooted not in outsiders or strangers, but in the very heart of the institution meant to uphold justice. The possibility that Daniel's murder was an inside job left the community shaken to its core, and for many, it marked the moment when faith in their protectors truly began to collapse. The case reached a breaking point when investigators quietly admitted there was little chance of ever finding conclusive answers. Evidence that might have tied suspects to the crime seemed to vanish just as quickly as it surfaced. Witnesses who initially came forward suddenly changed their stories or refused to speak at all. Files went missing from the department's archives, and key pieces of physical evidence were reported as damaged or lost. To many, it looked less like incompetence and more like deliberate sabotage. The investigation that had once promised justice for Daniel Ker Stetter was slipping into uncertainty, leaving a trail of frustration and unanswered questions. Despite public pressure, no arrests were made. The businessman who had once been the prime suspect was quietly cleared, while the officers on Daniel's list were never formally investigated. Some were even promoted, a fact that infuriated residents and fueled suspicions of a cover-up. Protests broke out in front of the police station, with townspeople demanding accountability. Yet behind the locked doors of the department, silence prevailed. The official narrative emphasized a lack of evidence, but off the record, many believed the truth had been buried to protect powerful names. Daniel's funeral was a moment of unity and sorrow. Thousands gathered to honor a man remembered for his honesty and courage. The streets were lined with mourners holding candles, and the sight of his flag-draped coffin moved many to tears. But beneath the grief was anger. People wanted to believe his sacrifice would not be in vain, yet the absence of justice made the ceremony feel hollow. His widow stood at the front, clutching their daughter's hand, while whispers circulated that the department had betrayed one of its own. Over time, the town changed. Trust in law enforcement eroded and suspicion lingered in every corner. Some residents believed Daniel's murder was connected to a network so deeply rooted in power that it could never be exposed. Others thought the truth was known all along but deliberately silenced. The unanswered questions became part of the town's identity, a reminder of how fragile safety and trust could be. Years later, the case remains unsolved. The memory of Officer Daniel Ker Stetter lives on not only as a story of dedication, but also as a symbol of betrayal and secrecy. His name is etched into the community's history, not for the countless lives he touched in service, but for the mystery that swallowed him and the justice that never came.